Hey guys, it's Kuzi here, and today we're doing a plus 23 Necrotic Wake walkthrough commentary. The affixes are Quaking, Sanguine, Fortified, with the Season 1 Shadowlands affix of Prideful. As always, talent choices, Covenant Tree and Bindings will be in the more detailed section below, so you can check that out. Let's get into it. My aim for this commentary is, rather than explaining every mechanic of the dungeon, because I feel like that's well covered already, is to discuss more what a Resto Shaman can do to make your team's life easier and to help you do hierarchies in pug groups or even in a team. You can easily pull this first 4 packs of the dungeon together with a coordinated group, set the Corpse Harvester there as your focus target, and interrupt the cast as frequently as possible. You may have noticed just beforehand when the dungeon started that my Earthen Wall Totem weak aura next to the mage's nameplate got extreme value on packs like this where there's multiple mobs hitting a tank. You can get very good value from Earthen Wall Totem. You get an easy 40k mitigation shield for them. Although the temptation on this pack is obviously to hit the caster to kill it as quickly as possible, the damage priority target is actually the Stitched Vanguard due to its increased damage over time on the tank. Lusting this pack on Fortified is a good idea. Along with Shadowlands came the discovery of the infamous Cardboard Assassin belt. You can enchant this to your belt if you're engineering and taunt the mobs similarly to Balanced Druid Treants. This is sort of old news, I guess, but as most of you know, when playing Resto Shaman, it can be tricky to get value out of your Earth Elemental due to the inability to control its taunt like you can, for example, on the Elemental specialization. If you use both Cardboard Assassin and the Earth Ellie at the same time, you will be able to get aggro quite easily for your Earth Elemental. This is because the Cardboard Assassin taunts. When the taunt falls off from them, aggro usually goes to the Earth Elemental. Kind of makes it like a supercharged taunting Earth Elemental. You can really save some pulls in the dungeon. The second pull here, Corpse Harvester again, focus target, just lock one down, interrupt as many times as possible as a Resto Shaman. Make sure you get good use out of your Earthen Wall Totem on these pulls. If you take that talent, I would recommend that if you heal a Brewmaster tank. Capacitator Totem is another very good, useful ability to use on these large groups of packs. As with each dungeon, it will be much easier by taking a player from the Covenant specific to that dungeon. Kyrian makes this dungeon incredibly easy for the healer, as you basically only have to heal the 5th and final Prideful at 100% mob count. All the other Prides, the 20, 40 and 60% will be basically killed and healed by the Kyrian Covenant abilities, if you time that well in your route, I guess. The 80% Prideful will be effectively killed by the Fleshcraft ability. The Throw Cleaver, who does the Fleshcraft ability upstairs. And obviously you'll have to heal the 100% Prideful because there is no way to cheese that, unfortunately. Sort of frees up your healing cooldowns a little bit as well, I guess. You can use them whenever you like because you don't have to think about Prideful too much. Blightbone, this first boss, actually super easy, and Resto Shaman has some really great tools to help deal with it for the team. It's basically a tank and spank with some minor mechanics. If he uses that targeting ability on you, Heavy Wretch, which is a frontal cleave, face it away from your team, try and face it into the wall or where you've come from. Don't face it into the middle or you'll pull all the other mobs. your aim should be to keep everyone pretty close to 100% because you never know who he's going to target with that. It's completely random. And if it's on someone who is on 50% health, on even a reasonably level key, they'll probably get one shot because Blizzard loves these mechanics. The carrion worms is another thing you can, as a Resto Shaman, you can help deal with. Root Totem, Cap Totem. Don't let them melee you. If they melee you multiple times, they will explode and kill your whole team, so you want to avoid that. Just try not to stand near those things. DPS should be focusing them, everyone should be using their abilities. Move towards the back of the boss and try and put the heavy wretch into the area it's already come from. Once again, CC the worms as often as possible and move away from them. My talent build for this dungeon is Unleash Life, Echo of Elements, Earth Grab, Earthen Wall Totem, Graceful Spirit, Cloudburst Totem, and High Tide. I'm running Jonat's Legendary for big juicy chain heals, which gets, to be honest, pretty average value on this dungeon. Obviously other builds using Ascendant and other legendaries are very good too. It's really down to personal preference of which legendary you like the most, because all of them are probably viable to some extent, within reason. I honestly don't think any of them are mandatory. Jonat's is really good when you take High Tide with it, because obviously you can get some absolutely massive chain heals, especially during High Tide with 5 stacks of Jonats. The next area of the dungeon, a little bit more complicated than the first. Can really feel awful in some pugs, this area. But be assured, Resto Shaman does have a few amazing tools that can make it easy for your group. Basically, there's these 5 types of mobs in this area you need to know about. The Necromancer, the Sorcerer, Marauder, Bone Mender, and the Mage. Try and CC the Mage every time, because it casts an annoying thing called Frostbolt Volley, as you're about to see. And when that goes off, it deals heavy AoE damage to the team, so that should be avoided. Interrupt as many Necrotic Bolts as you can from the Sorcerer and the Necromancer. Try and have a kick rotation for this. The Necrotic Bolts go off, sort of doubles as a damage on the tank, but also absorbs healing, so can be quite potent when many of them go off at the same time, or multiple go off in a row. So you really want to focus on kicking that as much as possible as a Resto Shaman. It reduces the amount of healing you do, and amount of healing absorbed as well. The other mobs we talked about, the Marauder in the next pack. Don't stand in front of that. Don't stand on the tank. It will cleave you and kill you on higher keys. So just stand behind that at all times. You can Tremor Totem its fear, so your team doesn't need to interrupt it if you're good enough, if you're good at timing that. Once again, I suggest that you just spam interrupt the Necrotic Bolt to reduce the tank damage. Someone in the group will inevitably save for the Bone Mender's well-named Bone Mend that heals a random mob, I believe. Very creative. Once again, on Pridefalls, there's really little point in healing when you have the Kyrian buff. So just do as much damage as possible to try and get rid of the prideful. Don't move when you have the prideful lights on you. Make everyone move around you. The biggest mistake I see in groups, even high level groups, is, for example, a mage might combust there, which is fine, but combust right next to the mobs because the orbs will do more damage than your combustion. Especially on this level key. Your damage means pretty small amount compared to the Kyrian orb. My Covenant Tree and Soulbinds are fairly straightforward. I'm using Venthyr. Have 2 Potency conjurants, Swirling Currents and Heavy Rainfall. Heavy Rainfall turns Healing Tide Totem with Healing Rain a pretty potent stacked AoE healing cooldown. I really like it. It's something we didn't really have in BFA, and it does feel really nice. Anyone who's done this dungeon more than once knows how important the weapons are and weapon choice in the dungeon. It's important to use them very well in higher keys. The 2nd, 3rd and 4th bosses are probably some of the harder parts of the dungeon, so our group generally saves the weapons for these bosses. Pretty straightforward, this area here. Effectively doing the same thing over again that we just previously did, focusing down the Necromancer. As you can see, CC that mage in the background. It does make things just so much easier. There are a few different classes that can CC that. You can check it out on MDT. This will be the first use of our weapon, one of our weapons on this dungeon. We'll use the orb here on a large bull with the Kyrian orb. You get 1 minute to use these, so make use of it. Just once again, stand in on the mobs. If you're not, little blue lights aren't flashing out of you, that means you're not hitting the mobs. You see our whole team's quite well stacked. Obviously you don't want to stack in front of the Marauder there, because that is what happens. You get cleaved and killed. Next boss is an interesting one. I think it's quite intricate, really. Some interesting mechanics. Shamans aren't particularly good in the fight, except for their ability to get the high volume of interrupts on the Necrotic Bolt. So take advantage of that. Makes the fight easier for others. Some classes like Hunter and Monk are extremely good on this fight because they can CC the mages. It means you can just ignore them and kill the boss. And when he final harvests, it does not do AoE explosive damage. I just single target in this boss fight. I don't really see any need to cleave the adds. There's not a lot of healing to do. I mean, he does a slight bit of damage on the tank. You can save your chain harvest for this phase, but otherwise just single target the boss. The DPS will cleave those adds down. I mean, it's quite a simple fight. The real thing you need to know as a healer is if you're popping healing cooldowns here, you're obviously making a mistake because there's no damage. One, there's no damage going out. But two, he gets a buff after he final harvests, and it causes him to do pulsing damage. So your team should be using defensive cooldowns after that. Once again, lusting this boss is recommended. Using a weapon on this boss is probably, or two, probably recommended as well. It does a lot of, it's a very annoying boss after the final harvest. It just does a lot of annoying pulsing damage, and if anything goes wrong, it can be quite tricky to heal. Obviously, when everything goes right, it's quite simple, as you can see. If you do end up taking High Tide, don't do what I did just there. Try not to ever chain heal outside of High Tide. It's quite ineffective healing. Should set up some appropriate weak auras like I have. Tracking your Jonats, High Tide, Tidal Waves, and Cloudburst. I think they're the important ones. Obviously Ascendance if you take that. And then it makes things a little bit more simpler in terms of tracking things. I don't think it makes the gameplay much more simple. I think each of them have their own difficulties in playing. Once again, this Corpse Collector is your job. Just kick Gore Splatter every time. Always kick that. Focus the Kyrian Stitch work. So once again, this is a very good mob because of the way it does a stacking debuff and increasing damage on the tank to use Cardboard Assassins. As you can see, I just used there, followed by your Earth Elemental. Really will save your tank's life. Once again, kick Gore Splatter. Don't let that go off. Someone in your group, like Drain Fluids, that's annoying if that goes off. Gore Splatter will probably kill you. So you just kick the priority target every time. It's not that hard. Set a focus interrupt. Put it next to your healing frames so you can't miss the cast. Everyone will make mistakes sometimes, but try and limit that by making setting up your UI so it's easy on the eye. So this is a pretty cool interaction here. As you can see, I have 57,000 health. Your Earthen Totem will also have 57,000 health when you use that. That's because Earth Elemental, because of Conduit choice, has more health than usual. And because of the Venthyr talent tree, you'll have more health as well. So as you saw there, we got a about a 53,000 shield for the tank with Earthen Wall, as you can see from the weak aura there. So it's quite a nice little interaction. Obviously you don't plan that to use your Earth Elemental to get that, but if it's up, it's a good time to use it and stand still so you get the Venthyr 10% health buff. Try and avoid moving as much as you can. I'm quite poor at this, but if you can, try and avoid moving as Venthyr, Resto, Shaman, or any Venthyr healer, because you do more healing obviously when you're still if you take the appropriate talents. This was what I was talking about earlier. Flesh Crafter Throw Cleaver will do high single target damage to the Prideful. Try and avoid standing on the person with Quaking and Prideful. You might die. Probably was partly my fault too, moving on top of him before that. This area really does become quite easy if you get all the interrupts and you help the tank with pet taunts and cardboard assassins and things. It's really not that challenging. If the team plays well, you really cannot rely on your tank to just face tank this. It's really not possible. And you should try and, if you can, as a Resto Shaman, just keep them out of the kick rotation. To make things easier. So I'll speak briefly around talent choices. I do talk about Earthen a lot. It is because of the tank I play with, I guess, and it being a very good external cooldown for them. But if you're not running a Brewmaster, even on this dungeon, I think Ancestral Vigor, as most people have figured out, is better. With the 10% health buff to your team and your tank when you heal them. Running double unused trinkets, I don't know if that's a good idea. Just felt like it would be. I got two good ones, so I decided to give that a go. They both feel pretty good when you use them. You can set your focus target to the left stitching assistant here. Just interrupt the drain fluids, because if you have melee and things in your team, they're probably going to be trying to avoid the morbid. So guys, watch here and just see the value Earthen Wall gets. So use it on pool, 44k, and you can see it ticking down quickly. And this is all just damage absorbed by the Totem, which is obviously the tank taking all the damage because no one else is taking damage. And so before it runs out, it's completely absorbed. So it's just a 44,000 shield for your tank. always struggle trying to explain that to people, and that's why I got that weak aura, because I feel like it shows its value a little bit better. Single target the Gore Grind here. You can certainly use your Cardboard Assassins and Earth Elemental here to help the tank, or you may want to use it on the next pull, which is one of the more poorly designed packs in the dungeon. Always stay away from this Gore Grind. No matter where anyone moves it, move away from the Gut Slice. It does a really annoying physical damage dot that you cannot Fire Blood or Stone Form if you're playing Alliance. For some unknown reason, I'm not sure why that is. So this is another one of those times you just have to heal. So for Rot's Spew, you can't let anyone on your team fall below. They just should be on 100% the whole time, basically. Otherwise, there is a high chance they will get one shot by his cleave mechanic. Cardboard Assassin, Earth Elemental. Keep your Earth Shield on the tank at all times for heavy single target. Actually, there's no time you shouldn't have Earth Shield on the tank. It's a bad mistake in Mythic Plus. Actually, it's just, it's a very simple thing to do. You should always have suggest a weak aura to track that. So you really need to keep your team topped off. As you can see, Spew Disease once again on the Rogue. Get him back to 100% quickly. Because you never know who the next one's going to be on. As you can see on the Rogue. This is the only Prideful you really need to heal in the dungeon, so you can see the value of High Tide and Jonats together. And obviously damage at the start of the Prides, because it doesn't really do any damage to the team. Try and keep your Cloudburst on cooldown. Obviously means you heal a lot more. Healing Tide Totem, Healing Rain, High Tides, Chain Harvest, Cloudburst. You just have so much AoE healing. It feels so clean to heal Pridefuls, and you can see I've still got at the end of that, still have a 62,000 Cloudburst stored to heal. Didn't even use things like Earthen Wall and Spirit Link. I mean, that's what happens when your team's playing properly and they use offensive cooldowns on the Prideful, which you really need to do in higher level keys. It's not practical to be doing sustained healing of 20 stacks of Prideful. It's damage Stitchflesh here. You don't need to kill the creation. Not as a healer anyway. Your AoE is pretty meaningful there. Just do single target. As you can see, it's a bit of a joke really when you have weapons for the fight and you use them appropriately. Final boss of the dungeon, you can wait for your cooldowns to come up if you have time, which you can see that we did. If you execute the rest of the dungeon well, you'll always have time left at the final boss to wait for your cooldowns to come back up. We save last for the last boss as well because it can be quite tricky. Few things you need to know for this fight. Just spread out away from the ranged DPS and get a targeted weak aura so you can see who to dispel quickly with frozen blinds, or look at target of target, whatever you like. Focus target, target. Ideally you dispel them instantly as soon as it hits them, but just be careful that no one else is near them, otherwise you will, that's a bit of a mechanics fail from the healer, can kill your teammate during Comet Storm because they will get frozen, binded to the ground. And the Comet, obviously they won't be able to move out of Comet Storm and they will die instantly, which I have seen before when I've been DPSing. definitely when I've been healing as well. The other ability you need to know about is Icy Shard. Keep the tank topped up, especially prior to Icy Shard. If you've picked up a weapon during the dungeon, like a spear or a hammer, then use it on this boss, obviously, if you've still got it. Do not use it unless he's in the shield phase. It's pretty low value. The shield phase is the real threat here, because when he's shielding, he will pulse AoE damage, and you want to break the shield as soon as possible, so when you're during Comet Storm, you do not have to cast, because obviously it's very difficult. Use your Spirit Walker's Grace though, if that does happen, so you can heal your tank up or your team up. Otherwise, just use your instants like Riptide, Endless Life, Cloudburst, etc. Overall, it's a pretty easy boss. I hope you guys enjoyed this commentary, and I hope it allows you to do higher necrotic weight keys. Thanks, guys.